Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, July 26, 2019. Time for yet another Friday show, and that means finding our way through as we go. Plenty to catch up on, of course, and so it'll be a matter of umming and ahhing as we try to select things from the back catalog of stories that haven't gotten any airtime yet, some of which have broken through, others of which have not yet, and we'll read them to you, and you'll think over the weekend that you heard it first here, and you may have heard it first here, and yet we're never the first ones reporting any of these things, or hardly any of these things anyway. Sometimes when Armando calls and tells us what's going on around him, whether he's at Netroots Nation or driving down the interstate or anything like that, oops, you know what, that kills our music. Dang, I didn't realize that was going to happen. Wow, I wish that hadn't happened. What an abrupt reawakening this morning. I wonder if I can find a software package that will allow you to play one piece of music over another. Well, shouldn't have done that. That'll hurt when it comes time to listen to the podcast. But for the rest of you, I think we'll survive. Might as well just dive right into it then. No point in delaying any further. Daily Kos Radio is live now, and that's one of the reasons we have to go ahead and do this. Daily Kos has its morning post up and a morning tweet from Bill accompanying it. Let's see, what will we be doing today? Kagro X ends the week by reminding you that the sitting president of the United States, and he loves to sit, and by the way, have you noticed what he does with his hands when he sits like that? All right. You're probably caught up on that one, too. Sitting president of the United States sold America's soul to Russia in exchange for a building in Moscow he never even got. That's true. Happy weekend, everybody. Yeah, we are in a precarious position. And things have been getting clearer and clearer as we go along. And, we'll figure out exactly where Democrats are on this stuff. It's difficult to read exactly what Nancy Pelosi has in mind. I'm beginning to think... I'm actually a little more optimistic, I think, at the end of the week than I was at the beginning. I feel like there's an opening being forced, perhaps. I don't know what the outcome of it is. I don't think anything has changed in the Senate. But I'm beginning to think that Nancy Pelosi is, I don't know what, she's not willing to accept it. Necessary. I mean, she's not happy about accepting it, but I think she's willing to accept it. I mean, the reality is the reality. I'm pretty sure she's starting to think that real soon a majority of the House Democratic Caucus is going to insist on some movement on impeachment, whether that's in the form of opening an impeachment inquiry, whatever that actually means. Or, I mean, I don't think they're ready. You're not going to see articles of impeachment on the floor of the House anytime soon. Don't forget, they're about to leave for a 5-week break, which is amazing because I just had to make the announcement to my kids. Your summer vacation's about over, kids. In 3 weeks, older boy, you'll be off to college. In about 4 weeks, younger boy, you'll be off to high school, which isn't really off at all. It's just a different part of town, but, exciting and new nonetheless, giving us 4 years to save up again to send the second one off to college. But Congress, on its way out for, I think, 5 weeks, which is pretty remarkable to be doing at this point in time. And, I'm not certain that's wise, quite honestly, to leave this lunatic in the White House alone with no Congress, not that they're actually checking him, but no Congress to supposedly check him for the next couple of weeks. Seems like a really dangerous situation. But I do think that there is some movement among the leadership, but, how resigned to it versus, yes, this is, an affirmative acknowledgement that the caucus is moving this way and we have to be ready versus can we do anything to stop it versus, I don't know, maybe just sort of, I know I can't stop this, but we all know it's not going to work. Maybe, sort of, kind of. I'm not sure where Pelosi actually is, and she's done a pretty good job hiding the ball. I mean, if you think that's a virtue, and it might be, to sort of sit stony-faced through all of this, though, when she's broken through in the past and you've been able to get an inkling of what's going on internally, it hasn't been good. But again, there's a role being played here, and sometimes it's difficult to tell where the role ends and where the personal belief begins, because they're all malleable. Both of them are malleable, and it's difficult to tell, exactly what side of the line she's coming down on. But one of the things that has been made plain by the Mueller hearings, and there will be more, not more Mueller hearings, but more hearings related to the Mueller report. There are definitely some people who have to come back and clarify a few things, and we'll see if we can get them. I mean, it may be that they defy their subpoenas and we go through the, several months of going back and forth with the courts, dancing around the issue. But there's more to come, and I guess, maybe we'll dive into some of the stories that'll help explain this thing. But we find ourselves in this strange place with all congressional activity being put on hold for the next couple of weeks when things really boil over. And as I mentioned in the Morning Post and a little bit on Twitter yesterday evening, we're in this weird place where we've been warned not only by Mueller himself, but by the director of national intelligence, a lot of the intelligence community concurring in the assessment that the Russian attacks on election integrity are ongoing, that they are being joined in their efforts by other nations who are finding out how cheap and easy it is to keep the United States off kilter and out of play on the national stage, and that's to their advantage. That would be to the advantage of everybody who positions themselves as a geopolitical foe, whether globally, as with Russia or China, or regionally, as with Iran. It's to your advantage to keep the United States populace, really, guessing as to whether or not their president is going to react appropriately, guessing as to whether or not their president is going to react at all, guessing as to whether or not their president is going to react in support of what have traditionally been American foreign policy goals or someone else's foreign policy goals. And in the middle of all this, of course, the FBI's counterintelligence operations are still, I remind you, required by law to brief people we have good reason to believe are essentially co-conspirators in the operation. To the extent that you believe, for instance, that Mitch McConnell is, if not, directly working for the election saboteurs, at least not working to thwart the election saboteurs because he thinks their interference will inure to the benefit of Republicans like himself. What would be the point then of continuing to brief a co-conspirator as part of the Gang of Eight, as they call them, the bipartisan leadership of the House and Senate and the bipartisan leadership of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, who are entitled to top-level security briefings of information sometimes deemed too sensitive for release to the wider Congress. Very tightly controlled, closely held, classified information about the FBI's efforts to counter these attacks are being fed, they have to be, to the Republican leaders of the House and Senate who have, made it clear that they have no interest whatsoever in thwarting the plans that the FBI counterintelligence group has just come and told them they're working to counter. And we have no idea where that information ends up. We found out, I think, through the Mueller report and sources working off of it, that these types of briefings, these high-level security briefings that were afforded to the Gang of Eight, included briefings to Senator Burr by virtue of his position on the Senate Intelligence Committee. And he was simply ferrying the information back to the White House when he was getting intelligence community and counterintelligence FBI community information about their investigation into the relationship between the Trump campaign, Trump White House, and Russian efforts. That information was being ferried back to the very person under investigation. Why is that? Why is there no suspicion, no speculation allowed, besides here, about how much of the top secret information being handed over to our country's supposed leaders, or rather, the people who are supposedly our country's leaders anyway, how much of it is being delivered back into the hands of the people perpetrating these attacks in exchange, maybe, they may not be getting their deal, they may not be getting their money's worth, so to speak, in the swap, but handed back to the people who are promising that in exchange for updates on what's the FBI doing to stop us, we'll make sure you win your election so that you remain in position to feed us that information. That's kind of a dangerous situation. So, with that in mind, we will take a look at the articles collected to try and put a finer point on some of that stuff. Let's see, we got a couple of ideas and comments. Rebecca Romans has sent me an article not directly on that subject, but certainly not off topic for the show. Look at this. Watching Twitter here, I see The Hill is still on the story of, and they tend to linger over these stories, still on the story of that weird fake presidential seal. And I think the Washington Post reporters, I think, are on the trail of finding out exactly not only where the graphic came from, but who was responsible for putting it up there. And if I'm not mistaken, there's a story on it. There was a diary on it, very highly rated diary on it at Daily Kos yesterday, and now I'm worried that I haven't put it aside. But I think we might still be able to pull that one. Oh yeah, in fact there have been 2 or 3 such stories, so we should be able to recover one or another of those and see where the trail leads. The the other suggestion here, Jack Ox sending us this comment: Russian bots are out. No, you mean like in versus out, like they're really out of fashion these days, or they're out and on the attack. They try to get followed by giving you your view. By giving your view, but you can see they are bots. Do not follow. They are trying to get in our feeds for election. Okay, well, so the warning is out. It's not that easy to actually get included in my feed these days. I feel like I try and limit things a little bit just to be able to stay on top of it. I think if I have too many people in the feed, I can't read anything that goes by. But it's a pretty rare thing for me, thankfully, just my own Twitter habits. I don't often just say, hey, that person agreed with me once, I'll follow them. I say I will keep an eye out and see how things are going. If I see that they are commenting to me or that others that I know are retweeting what they have to say and they turn out to end up in my feed all the time anyway, then no loss. I can, I can also say, well, no point in putting them in my feed. Other people put them in my feed all the time. But okay, a fair warning. And, everyone should take it to heart. Keep in mind that there's always the possibility out there that you're talking to a bot or that a bot is talking to you. Okay, let's see. Moving over to some of the story suggestions. This one was somewhat interesting, I thought. Rebecca sent this one, and I see that there's a fairly highly rated diary on this one on the front page, too. Not something I think that there's a great deal of serious reason to worry about. This one just more of along the lines of roll your eyes and have a laugh at what's going on here. But I guess Ilhan Omar, this should surprise no one, has drawn a challenger for her seat in Congress. The Guardian is reporting on her background, and then apparently she's made an appearance or two at Republican rallies in the district, and she has done with her voice and a microphone one of those things which resembles, well, something that we would otherwise, for another candidate who was perhaps more prepared, more experienced, better at the job of being a candidate, if you can call that a job. I mean, it's full-time work, certainly, but you understand it's a little bit of an odd situation. But what normally we would say gave a speech to a crowd, but the words that came out of her mouth and which were absorbed by the audience, their oral structures were able to detect sound waves, and many humans recognize them as a human speech pattern. That's really all we can say about it, but perhaps we can play you that clip. But here's the background on the woman who is challenging, so far anyway, Ilhan Omar. Just hang on just a moment here. Battling the morning frogs in the throat here today. I think I might have to come up with a throat clearing breakfast regimen. What's a good sandpaper, I guess, and hot boiling water. I don't know what we're going to do to try and clear things out here, but at any rate, breakfast making things tough at this point. So pardon me. Let's see. Here's the Guardian article. Let's get the thoughts organized here for just a second. So again, Ilhan Omar, it's early in her term. It is only July of 2019. By now, it's not uncommon at all for people to have declared themselves as candidates in opposition. The Republican Party probably not likely to find top-notch challengers in seats like this one, where registration is overwhelmingly Democratic. And here again, no surprise, very often they draw crank opposition for members like this. And you shouldn't get complacent about it, but this is an interesting and early indication of what it might take. And also, of course, at this stage of the game, if you can just declare yourself to be a candidate, and you can declare the party in which you pretend you are a serious candidate, and there's not very much that Republicans or Democrats can do about it, and you're permitted to run around passing yourself off as a candidate. However, I'll save Brian Beutler's comment for later. First of all, I'll probably have to dig it up just to make sure that I have it right. But first, we'll give you a flavor for why he said what he said about this. Here is the Guardian's article on pro-Trump Republican aiming to unseat Ilhan Omar, charged with felony theft. Now, that was not as a result of her claiming to be a candidate against Ilhan Omar. That was just something she did on her own time, of her own volition, before becoming a candidate. But important piece of background. As it turns out, not only is she a bit of a crank and loon, she's a bit of a loose cannon when it comes to stuff like, obeying the law. This is their exclusive report. They say Danielle Stella is her name, reported to support baseless QAnon conspiracy theory and held twice this year over alleged shoplifting. And yet here is this it's still very unprofessional in its composition, but it purports to be a candidate-style photo of Ms. Stella dressed in, what might pass for business attire. There's not that much of it visible in the picture, but backed by some flags. So that's pretty good. That's pretty standard. Maybe even some marble facade. It looks like she went into maybe a federal courtroom, or courthouse, or state office building, pulled up alongside some flags at a random spot and took a picture. And for low-budget operations, that's not a bad idea, actually. You should do the same. And the entire audience should declare for Congress this upcoming week. And when you do, you can use that tip for getting your headshot made for your campaign. All right. A pro-Trump Republican candidate for Congress who is aiming to unseat Ilhan Omar in Minnesota has been charged with a felony after allegedly stealing from stores. That's where the shoplifting happens. It's true. Danielle Stella was arrested twice this year in Minneapolis suburbs over allegations that she shoplifted items worth more than $2,300. She's got a good eye for these things. From a Target store and goods valued at $40 from a grocery store. So that's good. She's got a good eye for the quality items at Target and isn't gluttonous. These are positives as I see them. She's only stealing about $40 worth from the grocery store. She said she denied the allegations, and I really think that should be a matter of public record. Stella, a 31-year-old special education teacher, was reported this week to be a supporter of the baseless QAnon conspiracy theory about Donald Trump battling a global cabal of elite liberal pedophiles. And because we're reading The Guardian, we get the super interesting Euro-English spelling of pedophiles, which makes it look like pedophiles. P-A-E. They add an additional A in there. Pedophiles. I always found that interesting, even if the topic itself was off-putting. A special education teacher, eh? Well, I don't know what to say. Maybe she has a good heart, but not, all there in the head. Or maybe she's an evil special education teacher. This is possible as well. This week, Stella also described Minneapolis as, quote, the crime capital of our country. She has in the past complained that local police were overworked and overburdened and said that if elected, she would work to reduce crime. And I think, honestly, if she were elected, that probably by itself would reduce crime. There would be less shoplifting going on. Presumably, she'd be too busy, although I guess the shoplifting could just shift to Washington, D.C. Interesting. Police overworked and overburdened. I guess she wanted to relieve them of the burden of at least 2 police reports. If you don't arrest me, you'll be less overworked and less overburdened. How interesting. The crime capital of the country. But it doesn't count. She's not part of it. She was arrested in the suburbs. Minneapolis proper is the crime capital. I'm not contributing to that. I do all of my crimes in the suburbs. In a series of text messages, Stella said, I am not guilty of these crimes. In this country, I am innocent until proven guilty, and that is the law. I mean, that is the law, but there's also the law against shoplifting, but never mind that. She added, if I was guilty of crimes, I would never run for public office. And this is only barely running for public office, so she might be guilty. Putting myself in the public eye under a microscope to be attacked by all political sides. That's coming. An attorney for Stella, Joshua London, declined to comment. His name is Joshua London, and this is being reported in The Guardian. That counts as a matrix glitch. Someone call Oliver Willis. Stella is accused of stealing 279 items. That's a lot of items, valued at $2,327.97 from a Target store in Edina. Is it Edina? I don't even know. That's to the southwest of Minneapolis. And I ignore everything to the southwest of Minneapolis. If this was a southeastern suburb, I'd know it cold. Not really. But maybe a Minneapolis area listener can tell us whether that's Edina or Edina. And in case we need to go shoplift there, we want to get it right. I mean, I don't want to both shoplift and mangle the local pronunciations. This happened on, as they say in England, 8 January this year. She was arrested for the alleged theft after security staff called the police. A criminal complaint filed to, is it Hennepin County District Court alleged Stella was seen. Stella, you were seen leaving. So let's just yell her indictment to her. You were seen leaving the store without paying for most of her haul. She paid 97 cents worth, maybe. I don't know. after scanning only a few other items that were valued about $50. So she had a whole plan going. That's good. It's important to have plans like Elizabeth Warren has. Not shoplifting plans, but, it's a start. The complaint said Stella told police in a statement she remembers arriving at Target to purchase items, but nothing else, due to, this is terrible, post-traumatic stress disorder. From what? I'm not sure, but, we'll take it seriously for the moment. And that she normally goes to Target with someone else, I guess, because of anxiety around people, which that's, I get the picture. Somebody who, who she's familiar with and who is calming to her. But it does seem a little nonsensical to say, I normally go to Target with someone else because I'm anxious around other people. So I bring someone to make sure I'm going to be anxious each time. I assume a calming influence is what she brings with her. Stella has publicly said that she's the victim of a severe violent assault in 2008. She is charged with the thefts under her former surname. Oh, that's interesting. Which the Guardian agreed not to report because she said it could endanger her safety. So the Guardian is taking it certainly more seriously than I am. All right. Well, good. We should be open to that. She is charged with felony theft over the incident at Target and faces a punishment of up to 5 years in prison and a fine of $10,000 if convicted, according to court filings. So, okay, it's a fairly serious charge, this one. Our break is coming up. We'll spend another minute or two finishing up this story here and on the other side of the break, and then we'll give you a sneak preview, by which I mean I will play a clip for you of her attempt at giving a speech to a crowd, and this will give you some idea of her level of preparedness for the race if the shoplifting charges and PTSD claims didn't do it for you. All right, after this, I guess we shouldn't pile on that much more. We'll be right back. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Still digging around looking for that Brian Beutler tweet. I hope I can at least remind myself of that by the end so that we can pull that up and add that to the coverage here. I guess we'll continue on just by way of pushing on with the story here. Continue with the Guardian tale. How much longer does this one go on? All right, so where were we? We had left off that she was picked up on these charges, faces up to 5 years in prison and a fine of $10,000 if convicted. Police and court records said a warrant was put out for Stella's rearrest for alleged contempt of court. Uh-oh, you can't have another member of Congress who doesn't have any respect for contempt charges. This happened on, as the English say, 4 April, after she failed to show up for a court hearing. That's what happens. Officers in nearby Bloomington then arrested Stella on 28 April after she was allegedly seen by security staff at a Cub Foods grocery store stealing a bottle of tick spray for cats. Well, she was shoplifting on behalf of her furry friends, so I don't know. Maybe we can find room in our hearts to forgive her. And she was also seen placing other items under her purse so that they could not be seen. But I guess they were. I was seen putting something where it couldn't be seen. I was playing peekaboo with them, that's all. When they checked her identification, police officers discovered the open warrant for Stella's arrest over her failure to appear in court for the earlier alleged shoplifting, their incident report said. You could do a lot to help relieve the overburdening of our police by showing up for court. Also, and not stealing, but okay. The report said Stella was arrested for alleged misdemeanor, with a extra U in there, misdemeanor theft for taking, quote, cat merchandise and cat food valued at $40.46. They didn't tell you about the extra 46 cents. Ha! Lying media. Anyway, she was issued with a citation and given a date to appear in court. Not that that meant much to her. It was not clear whether authorities would pursue the contempt of court allegation. Stella's candidacy has attracted interest from the far-right conspiracy website InfoWars, which broadcast an interview with her this week. Stella laughed and nodded as the host, J. Owen Schroyer, called Omar a witch and said everything about her is a fraud, which is kind of nervy, but okay. Describing Minneapolis during the interview as America's crime capital, Stella falsely claimed that crime in the city had risen by 80% over the past year. That's just her. According to Minneapolis police data, there has been a 10.7% uptick in serious crime year on year, following a 16.5% decline in 2018. A right-wing commentator, or the right-wing commentator, the only one they have left, Todd Starnes, promoted Stella in an interview earlier this month on Fox News' streaming service Fox Nation. That's for things that are too crazy to get on the television Fox, I guess. We certainly wish Miss Stella the very best, Starnes said, adding that he hoped for a significant change in representation in Omar's district. Well, whatever. Last month, Stella officially registered with the Federal Election Commission as a candidate for the Republican nomination in Minnesota's 5th Congressional District. She later spoke at the Demand Free Speech rally in Washington. I don't know, maybe that's the video footage we have. She has accused Omar of being a criminal for advising immigrants how to avoid agents from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. She said in a tweet that any representatives who fail to, quote, uphold the rule of law should be ejected from office. So at least you won't have to stay in Washington that long, I guess. Court records say that in 2009, Stella pleaded guilty to driving while impaired from alcohol and fleeing a police officer. Those poor overburdened bastards. The latter charge was prosecuted as a felony but later classified as a gross misdemeanor. It's one of the grossest I can think of, as part of Stella's plea. So she's a troubled young lady, to say the very least. That does not necessarily mean that she's going to be the Republican nominee for this position, but it is worth noting, and I don't know that they're going to draw a whole lot of strong quality opposition to Omar, although Omar has garnered so much attention. It may be that they get let's say, a more together sacrificial lamb to put up against her come general election time. It might not be this woman, or it may just be that they say, we just don't have a really serious shot at this seat, so I guess it doesn't really matter if this woman wants to entertain herself and spend whatever money she can steal on pretending that she's a serious candidate. Well, then, so be it. I guess we're just going to be stuck with her. Okay, I did find the Brian Boitler tweet, and this was a good one. I like the idea. It's right up my alley. Anyway, here he's reacting to a tweet about Danielle Stella from John Swain, who is he the Guardian reporter who wrote this piece? I see that he is a Guardian. I forgot to credit John for writing the piece from New York, maybe in American English, and then it got translated into British English by the editors over there, or maybe that's his job, is to write it that way. But John Swain is the author. The Guardian puts the byline kind of off to the side there, and you can easily skip right past it unless you are reminded to go look at it. So it was John Swain's article and John Swain's tweet circulating his article about Danielle Stella that Brian's reacting to. But Brian has a good point. This is how it should be thought of, right? I mean, she's looking to replace Ilhan Omar, who's a member of the Squad, He says this person, Danielle Stella, is part of, he just asserts this, part of a squad that is the face of the Republican Party, and she should go back where she came from. Now, where are my 6 New York Times features about how this tweet is politically savvy for Dems? Right? I figure he's going to be a weekend talk show guest with a comment like that. So, very interesting. Good perspective. It's true. There's no basis, of course, for calling the squad the face of the Democratic Party. I mean, it wouldn't be, the worst thing in the world if they were in terms of policy for the most part. But they're not. They're brand new, backbench Democratic representatives, 4 of 230 or so in the House, and not a part of leadership, not setting the agenda for the Democratic Party at large, though there are many who agree with them to pretend that they are the face and the leadership of the Democratic Party is, of course, disingenuous. Brian just playing on that. I suppose if it can be done this way, it can be done in reverse as well, but somehow I think even Brian knows that's just not going to catch on anytime soon, and the savvy Washington press isn't going to buy into the notion that Danielle Stella is in fact the face of the Republican Party going forward. Well, she may be the voice of the Republican Party going forward. I have here in pocket a tweet from a random guy on Twitter. Let me see if I can set this whole thing up with pauses and turn up the sounds so that you'll be able to hear it when I finally do play it. Danny, who tweets as Danzu72, I guess was on hand to take, I don't know whether he took this video himself, but he just says, allow me to introduce Danielle Stella, the Republican running to unseat Representative Omar. He jokes, please be patient, English is not her first language. That may be true. I don't know for sure, but, she doesn't do a particularly good job with it here in this video. Now, I don't know, the buildings in the background certainly look like they could be Washington, though it could certainly be Minneapolis too. But I understand that the article said that she spoke at some kind of gathering in Washington. This may or may not be it. So here she is she's considerably less professionally dressed than she was in the headshot, but it's a hot day outside, I'm sure. And so here she is in her sleeveless red dress and displaying her tattoo prominently. It was a hot day, nothing terribly unusual about it, but certainly if Michelle Obama had worn the dress, it would be cause for concern among Republicans. She's wearing a poorly fitting backpack along with her Trump hat, I guess. This is not the official MAGA hat, but clearly a knockoff type of Trump hat. And carrying a tiny American flag, very important for her as a candidate. She is handed the microphone and gives it her best shot at her first speech as a candidate. And she could use some media training, is what I'm saying.
Happy stuff. Tell them who you're running against. This is Danielle Stella.
Yes! Hi, everyone. I'm running against Ilhan Omar, and I'm going to beat her for representing America. We do not like her talk about our country. We do not believe now when some people did something. She is awful and she needs to go. Yes. I love America. I love the freedom of speech, and I love the Second Amendment, and I love all of you. We have strength and unity. Yes. Our website is Stella2020.com if you want to learn more. She has to be replaced along with all the Justice Democrats. Thank you.
Well, that's it. That's the entirety of the speech. It was a 43-second clip. I don't know if you were able to make out any of the words that she thought she was using. The audio is, but that's actually pretty clean audio. She's just not a good speaker. But as you may have been able to make out, she is running for office, and Ilhan Omar has to be replaced, along with all the Democrats. I love this country and our freedom of speech, and we have strength and unity, and we must stop Omar. Okay, so, well, it's a mission, That's and it's out there, and everyone should also know that she wears a rather large gold-plated crucifix around her neck, and so she's a pretty serious Christian. So take it seriously. It's out there. It's a thing that is happening now, and I really this is far too much time to have spent on it. But I don't know. I felt like I was getting warmed up to the topic. But it's time to move on to the more serious items on our list for today. I do have a piece here from the Daily Beast that will take us back to the opening of the show when I was telling you I'm not certain exactly where Pelosi stands these days. I don't know if I put any other things aside in pocket, but I specifically on Pelosi. There is at least one other piece, but based on reviews of her performance at the press conference following the Mueller testimony, it seems, some saw in it more of the same sort of stonewalling. We're just simply not going to push forward with impeachment on political grounds, electoral grounds. But others saw if grudging, a new openness, I guess, to the idea that, this may become an inevitability. And I think this piece speaks to that. The other piece that I had lying around, I think, written before the press conference. Let me just see if I can open it up and see if I can confirm that that's the case. Well, July 24th, but it doesn't tell me when. And I guess, though, that this one was written, I'm guessing it was published before the testimony and before the press conference. I'm looking at a piece from Elizabeth Spiers, I'm guessing is the pronunciation, Spiers, in the New Republic. Beyond Pelosi, why impeachment can't penetrate the cult of D.C. savvy. I don't know whether to go with this one first or the other, just in the hopes that they are roughly in chronological order. And this is a rather lengthy piece. Maybe I can read that, and then I can tell you what I read in the Daily Beast today and see if that turns into a Pelosi narrative that we can make some sense out of. Elizabeth Spiers' piece here, Beyond Pelosi, begins this way. Every time I see Nancy Pelosi patiently spell out the higher political wisdom of refraining from impeachment proceedings against Donald Trump, I think of Alan Greenspan. That's obviously not because the Speaker of the House and the famously tight-lipped former Fed chair have any affinities of political outlook or personal temperament. Rather, it's because, as a former financial journalist, I'm reminded of how Greenspan's observers in the financial industry tended to project all manner of genius onto him simply because he refused to articulate in any concrete way that involved anything so crass as a narrative what he was thinking or doing. For market watchers and finance industry savants, Greenspan was a human koan, or K-O-A-N, upon which they were expected to puzzle out their own economic enlightenment. If you didn't get it, you were the idiot. Well, I didn't get what koan was supposed to be doing in there, but okay. Made me feel enlightened just to read the article. And now, she continues, I get the sense that Pelosi's refusal to articulate her strategy with regard to Trump is being met with the same familiar projection of assumed good faith and competence. Most important, her imputed leadership savvy, like Greenspan's long pre-crash tour atop the Fed, is routinely taken for granted as the most accurate and astute analysis of the current situation that will either one day produce or is already leading to a well-thought-out, nimble, and unassailable tactical response. She has got a track record, but okay. When people do inexplicable things, it's always tempting to project qualities onto them that would offer a more innocuous explanation of their behavior than bad judgment, fecklessness, or stupidity. This is not working for Donald Trump, by the way. And this particular bias has infected contemporary political analysis with a virulence that rivals Ebola. This is really flowery stuff. Even when the subject's motives are as transparent as Donald Trump's, there will always be a class of pundit who insists that Trump is playing 3D chess when, as one anonymous staffer puts it, more often than not, he's just eating the pieces. That's a good one. This reflexive tendency to dress up a posture of inattention as inscrutable cunning applies even more so to people who are smart and capable, or at least have a record of behaving as if they were, What I now think of as the Alan Greenspan fallacy is pervasive among elites who believe intelligence is synonymous with inevitable progress, realism, and pragmatism. So, when Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, an effective and often groundbreaking career politician, refuses to articulate a rationale for failing to hold Trump accountable, she gets the benefit of the doubt, and quite a bit more. When she says something that provokes Trump or forces him to be defensive, this is read as active management of Trump, and not Trump behaving in the reactionary fashion he always does. Of course, if it's that predictable and then you provoke it, then I think you do deserve some credit for that. This particular brand of savvy being the ability to, quote, get into Trump's head, as Maureen Dowd put it in her now notorious interview with Pelosi earlier this month, as though there's some concrete political victory associated with this cranial burrowing, or more to the point, as if there's anything in the big, broad world that doesn't get into Trump's head. Whenever Pelosi claims to have a plan for managing him long-term, she's met with affirmational centrist validation that says she knows what she's doing, and that any inability to parse her logic must definitionally be a shortcoming on the part of the observer. This I find true. In short, if Trump is playing 3D chess, Pelosi must be operating in some more sophisticated double-digit dimension that's so beyond the ken of regular voters that none of us can possibly comprehend it. Surely there has to be a strategy behind all of this sitting around, claiming to be outraged and doing nothing. Pelosi herself has done much to enforce this perception, both with her refusal to communicate her rationale — silence is often mistaken for genius — and by periodically alluding to hypothetical wheels in motion that may or may not exist at all. When forced to comment, she's fearless, but only in her willingness to insult the intelligence of other Democrats. We're told that the plan, whatever it is working because Trump is self-impeaching, a nonsensical claim belied by the daily onslaught of cascading horrors that the administration continues to unleash upon Americans with no consequence whatsoever. If he is self-impeaching, however that happens, it's happening so slowly and incrementally that it's not visible to the naked eye, and it's doubtful that he'll have completed the process before the end of a second term. It's not clear whether Pelosi even thinks people actually believe this line of reasoning. She just doesn't seem to think it's her job to convince them. Voters handed Democrats a meaningful avenue for holding the executive branch accountable in 2018, but Pelosi seems to have no interest in the hard work of doing that, except in as much as it means Democratic Party elites will issue public statements condemning the president's actions and effectively fundraise off of those public statements. As far as she's concerned, her assurance that she's in some distant fashion righting the wrongs of Trumpism by hoarding her own symbolic political power should be action enough for now. All right, I think you get the flavor of where this is going, and I'm not convinced by the opening that we're going to get any hard data on what's going on, or even a cursory look at the possibility that she might have a plan. So I think I'll recommend that you review it on your own time, but that we move on from there to the piece from the Daily Beast today, which I think is a little closer to political analysis as opposed to critique, but I'm not positive of that. Let's take a look at this piece here under the headline of "There is Constant Battling. Nadler and Pelosi are on a collision course." And they've done a good job at presenting a united front so far, but I guess it's just becoming more and more difficult. The Judiciary Committee chair, the subheader says, is facing immeasurably difficult political pressures as he navigates a post-Mueller world. This is a collaboration of Betsy Woodruff, Sam Stein, Aaron Banco, and Asawin Subsang, whose name I attempt to get, if not correct, then consistent from time to time whenever we call his name on these pieces. Jerry Nadler finds himself at the most delicate point of his tenure atop the House Judiciary Committee, with his star witness, Robert Mueller, having testified to less than stellar reviews. The longtime New York Democrat is pinched between a growing pro-impeachment chorus and a House Speaker, they say, hell-bent on pumping the brakes on such talk. So, there's a perspective here. Okay. Publicly, His colleagues and his party's leadership praise his handling of oversight into the Trump administration, but behind the scenes, discontent is mounting over what some view as a less than smooth process in handling investigations into President Trump and his advisors. There is constant battling. The speaker is very much directing the major decisions, said one Democratic lawmaker. I think this is a strategy by Nancy Pelosi to try and slow walk this process and shift some of the attention away from her not moving forward. She puts it on the Judiciary Committee, saying, they haven't yet done all the investigative work yet. They are being meticulous and taking their time. It's a way to slow walk it. And that's an interesting observation there too, right? Without commenting on whether or not the Judiciary Committee itself is in fact slow walking it, it's an interesting way of not only excusing slow process, but of encouraging slow process, or forcing slow process, to say that they're being meticulous and without laying blame on them. Like, that's a good thing to be, is meticulous, right? So it's difficult to tell whether she is, she could be taking cues from them, and they're saying, we're being meticulous. We want to move slowly and make sure we get this right, and she carries that water for them and takes the heat. Or it could be that they want to move considerably faster, and she has implored them not to, and they are deferring to her as party leader. My indications from what I'm reading are that the members of the Judiciary Committee are, if not enthusiastic supporters of impeachment, I don't think that's a fair generalization of where they are, but they're much more convinced of the inevitability, and that they're right, and that they have reached this conclusion ahead of their colleagues because of the nature of their work, but they recognize the necessity of bringing the caucus along, and they recognize the integral role the speaker plays in helping bring the caucus along and deciding when the caucus needs to move, to the extent she can control it. All committee chairs and House speakers have disagreements over jurisdiction, power, and strategic direction. But the relationship between Nadler and Pelosi is particularly sensitive now, given the stakes of the issues they're tackling. The special counsel's office is closed, its report made public, and its director, Mueller, has testified on Capitol Hill about its contents. Now that the Russia investigation, as the American public understands it, has all but come to an end, both leaders are left answering questions about what comes next. For Pelosi, the answer is simple: stay the course. For Nadler, that course is becoming increasingly difficult to track, with members from his own committee and constituents back home calling not only for impeachment proceedings, but for tougher posture toward a White House that seems hell-bent on making his oversight work impossible. As more lawmakers have come out in favor of impeachment proceedings, even after Mueller's sometimes shaky testimony, Pelosi has remained unmoved. After course-correcting the caucus on the impeachment messaging earlier this year, sources say the speaker is not ready to relax her watchful eye over Nadler's committee, fearful the caucus could once again nosedive into chaos. Did it at any point nosedive into chaos? I must have missed that. Those close to Nadler say the chairman works in tandem with Pelosi on strategy and messaging, often to the chagrin of his fellow committee members who wish he would act more forcefully on his pro-impeachment impulses. That's the read I get. His defenders argue that talk of tension is overblown, fed often by aggrieved party members who dish to the press. They also say he has successfully balanced the demands of the Democratic base and the push by Pelosi's office to implement a more methodical approach. Former Representative Donna Edwards of Maryland said she believes Nadler would be in full impeachment mode if he were just operating on his own, but he's restrained himself, colleagues say, in order to help manage a caucus with diverse opinions on the matter. I think the chairman has been very meticulous in the kind of a chess game strategy. He's working very closely with House counsel to make sure we are positioning ourselves in the strongest position, that we are doing it in a way that strengthens our hand in the litigation, said Representative David Ciccolini, I think we finally decided his name was, of Rhode Island. From the outside, that can look frustrating and maybe not everyone understands the legal intricacies. But I think the chairman recognizes that the speaker's instructions are to continue to hold the president accountable and to collect all of the information you need. The next steps in that accountability process are set to come soon, with Nadler's team intensifying their efforts to get Trump's former lawyer, Don McGahn, to testify. Following Mueller's hearing Wednesday, Nadler said the committee was prepared to sue for access to the grand jury material related to Mueller's report and to enforce a subpoena for McGahn. That might finally force the issue, might finally reveal whether or not the courts are going to adopt the position that grand jury material can be withheld from Congress in the absence of an impeachment inquiry somehow so designated. We'll find out. And it may be that that the plan is to attempt to wrest it free in the courts without declaring any of their proceedings to be impeachment proceedings. And if it fails, and they're given an indication by the court that designating their proceedings as impeachment proceedings would somehow make a difference, they may go ahead and do that and approach it all over again, which of course will just, add months to the process, or perhaps only weeks if they decide that they would likewise expedite their proceedings if the situation changed and they were, it is kind of dumb though. It's the sort of thing that you would think that a court would ordinarily reject as form over substance. So there's some possibility that they may win even without that, which would only reinforce the Pelosi position of caution, by the way. So I don't know whether you want to root for that or not, unless you could say getting to the bottom of this stuff and enforcing our subpoenas is the most important thing. Political victory against Pelosi is of no interest to me. That's probably where we ought to come down. We'll come back to it in a minute. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We got a couple of things to catch up on here, including some interesting observations. How do we get to why is this one attached to this? I'm not certain of. But anyway, a couple of technical corrections before we continue with things. John Godin tweeting to us to file in the It's a Clip, Not a Magazine folder. The crucifix has a little, this is the way he says, a little Jesus affixed. I think we all have a little Jesus affixed, don't you? Well, not me, but maybe the rest of you. Anyway, I get what you mean. Okay, so this is interesting. I never really thought about this. It makes a certain amount of sense, right? Whereas a simple cross minus the Jesus is a cross. What makes a crucifix? Jesus, I guess. I'll take your word for it. I mean, that's interesting. Couldn't anybody be attached and make it into a crucifix? I mean, it's alone, it's just a cross. So those are just two pieces of wood here. What are you going to do with it? I'm going to crucify someone on it, and that will be, the instrument of their crucifixion. And so therefore, I guess once somebody's nailed to it, it becomes a crucifix. I don't know if it has to be Jesus, but I'll take your word for it. I guess there's good reason to believe you might know better than me. For instance, you pointed this out. But what a great technicality. It's sort of like a procedural observation, right? Okay, so let's get that right. She had, I think there was no Jesus on her cross. So it was just a regular cross. A cross waiting for a crucifixee. Or how about afterwards? Once they take Jesus down, does it turn back just into a regular cross? Okay. Or is it now permanently crucifixed? There's been a Jesus on it at some point. Time, of course, being a flat circle, I suppose everything, it's always a crucifix. It's just waiting for its Jesus. All right, I'm going to get struck by lightning if I stay on this topic for any longer. Let's see. Okay. We also have the observation of Parlio, who definitely knows better. Oh, and John's also saying, he says, okay, the Rhode Island representative, I was pretty sure we had played I actually went out of my way and played a YouTube video of a interview with him, but I must be remembering it wrong. It's Ciccolini, not Ciccolini. I don't know why it would be. It doesn't indicate that, but I don't know. I'm confused. This is a Italian surname, I think, and I'm pronouncing it for some reason like with, I don't know, almost Turkish pronunciation. Watching too many Turkish adventure soap operas on Netflix. So Ciccolini is, and now that I recall, I think maybe we did hear this on the YouTube video. Anyway, from Rhode Island. John lives in the other district in Rhode Island. There's only two, and so, you think after redistricting there's only going to be one, and maybe he'll be their senator? Well, that could be. Okay, but that has nothing to do with the pronunciation of the name. And also he thinks we might be right. It could be anybody that gets nailed or tied or super glued or whatever to the cross, to thereby turning it into a crucifix. In that sense, nothing special about Jesus, but a lot of people thought that there was something pretty special about Jesus that had nothing to do with the fact that any other person could turn a cross into a crucifix. But that's a story for another day. Okay, I think we're caught up on that. Parlio, though, observing as a native British English speaker that, he says, we don't actually say 8 January, but rather, when you read it out loud, I guess, you're saying the 8th of January. Do I know that? I didn't, I don't think. It didn't occur to me that would be the case. I suppose, just like anything else, it is a print media convention, as he says. I never noticed it until your weird enunciation. But I guess that would be like, we don't, for instance, say, I paid $20 for that. We say, I paid $20 for that. It's read as $20, not $20, right? So you see 8 January in print and you say 8th of January. Of course, we do it the other way around and say January 8th, and it's all printed there, so we know what to read. It's scripted for us, and I guess we make room for that those extra characters by eliminating most of the U's from words that don't actually need them, and the A's from pedophilia. So I guess it all comes out in the wash on that. Okay, so now back to the serious subjects of David Ciccolini and the various things he's been involved in here. We actually left off with his quote, right? That I think the chairman has been very meticulous, chess game strategy, working very closely with House counsel, going slow, strengthening our hand in the litigation. He also continued saying, from the outside it can look frustrating, right? And maybe not everyone understands the legal intricacies, but I think the chairman recognizes that the speaker's instructions are to continue to hold the president accountable and collect all the information you need. Then there was the effort to get Don McGahn to testify, and the suit for grand jury material presumably being filed absent the existence of a formal impeachment inquiry, whatever that might mean. Two aides familiar with that effort said that while the committee is in the throes of preparing the suit, I didn't know that was something you could get in the throes of, but it will also try to negotiate directly with McGahn about appearing in public for questioning. But while Nadler is spearheading the committee process, he isn't always the one in the driver's seat. Following the release of the Mueller report in April, the Judiciary Committee began negotiating with the Department of Justice for access to the unredacted report and its underlying documents. During that process, according to 3 sources familiar with the situation, Pelosi stepped in, telling the committee it needed to fight to get those documents released to the entire House. 2 of those sources said they believe that intervention led to the initial breakdown in talks between the Judiciary Committee and DOJ. The committee ended up obtaining both the unredacted report and some of its underlying documents, and members have viewed them over the last several weeks at DOJ. Well, that's interesting. I suppose, well, that throws a new light on it, depending on how you think she was operating here. So We're talking about the Judiciary Committee negotiating with DOJ for access to the unredacted report and underlying documents. And presumably they were saying, well, we just need it for Judiciary Committee members. Could we have that limited distribution? Thinking that the DOJ might be more inclined to share that stuff, even if it was, you can only view it here at controlled DOJ facilities, but we'll let members of the Judiciary Committee look at it. Or maybe sometimes they'll say the chairman and ranking member are the only ones who can look at it. It could be a situation like that. For Pelosi to step in at that point and say, well, I want you to change your demand is interesting. And the demand is, no, all members should be able to look at this. So on the one hand, you could view this as, well, this is the more, I don't know, I mean, is there anything particularly progressive about it? But this is the more aggressive stance. All members should be able to review this, not just Judiciary Committee members. On the other hand, it is possible to look at this and say, well, you know who we're negotiating with, and you know what the position of the of executive departments tends to be in this, that they would like to restrict access where possible. And for now, I think as Judiciary Committee chairman, it might be advisable to simply accept the limited distribution of these materials, and we'll report, verbally to the full caucus anyway, if not the full House, or produce a report that makes available to the full House our views of what the material contains. And you should trust the committee process to delegate this power to us to review this material and tell you, give you the too long, didn't read report on it. It may very well be the case that Pelosi knows very well that that's more likely to work with the DOJ, but that it's an unassailable position from a public perspective. It's unassailable to insist that the entirety of the House be allowed to review these materials, but also knows that that will lead to an automatic rejection of the demands from the Justice Department. So that will be a very interesting backhanded way of inserting yourself into the process to muddy the waters or to slow down progress, but without having fingerprints on the case that could obviously be read as delaying tactics. You'd have to know a little something about how the DOJ usually opens access slowly to materials like this, and that it would be likely to reject a broader request, and it may simply not be true. That's speculative. All right, so it's interesting to note that she stepped in at this point. Two of the sources said that they believe the intervention led to the initial breakdown in talks between the Judiciary Committee and the DOJ, and the committee did end up obtaining both the unredacted report and some of the underlying documents. And I guess members of the committee have been able to review them over the last several weeks. Adding to the complexity of Pelosi and Nadler's relationship is its history, or limitations thereof. A former lawmaker noted that when Representative John Conyers helmed the committee for Democrats, he rarely pushed back against Pelosi's agenda. Conyers left Congress in late 2017 during a sexual harassment investigation, and now Nadler has taken his place. The New Yorker, the lawmaker noted, is much pluckier than his predecessor. Okay. That is to say, they're not speaking of the publication, the New Yorker. That is, Nadler, this other lawmaker noted, is much pluckier than his predecessor, Conyers. And that's likely true. My recollection of investigations of the George W. Bush administration over charges that likewise I think should have by rights should have led to impeachment, but similarly to this situation, everyone was reluctant to do so. Although this one I think is far more egregious in a broader number of ways here, but a larger number of ways in a broader spectrum as well. Nadler, I always thought, was a lot more receptive to the notion that they ought to be fighting hard and pushing harder towards, at least more effective oversight, if not impeachment, in the George W. Bush administration, and that Conyers was much more cautious. Although I do think Conyers believed deeply that he should be impeached. He just wasn't as aggressive in his pursuit as I thought Nadler might have been. But Nadler hasn't wowed anybody with his aggression in pursuit of this either. So, okay. The Judiciary Committee has been at the front lines of the fight between Congress and the Trump administration, but a host of other committees share executive branch oversight responsibilities. As you know, if impeachment proceedings begin, all those investigations would move under House Judiciary. I don't know that that's actually the case at all. Traditionally, it's been the Judiciary Committee that has handled impeachment proceedings with respect to the formulation of articles of impeachment. But that does not necessarily, here I'm going to comment on this one, that does not necessarily mean that those investigations must immediately be handed off to the Judiciary Committee. And that's a confusion that Pelosi has been eager to exploit, I think. And it may very well be that they all eventually funnel into the Judiciary Committee, but I would draw a parallel to the reconciliation process. It is true, it is a truism, if you will, to say that reconciliation bills are always reported out of the Budget Committee. But it's not the case that other committees have to subsume themselves necessarily to the Budget Committee, that they have to give up the work that they're doing and hand authority to finish that work up to the Budget Committee. Committees that are directed to find savings by reconciliation instructions do that work all by themselves, and they come to their own conclusions and report out a measure that is then referred to the Budget Committee for consolidation into a single reconciliation bill. Yes, that part is true, but it doesn't remove them from the process. Neither do I think the initiation of an impeachment proceeding would remove the jurisdiction over other investigations from the hands of other committees. They would be allowed to finish their work. They might even style their report as recommended articles of impeachment, and they might decide to hand that work over to the Judiciary Committee for them to reformulate or even just borrow verbatim from the report and list as articles of impeachment in some resolution that the Judiciary Committee would then report out to the floor of the House for a vote on formal articles of impeachment being adopted. That's possible, but there's really nothing about this that requires that the other committees stop their work. They could be directed to stop their work, either because they think that's strategically wise or because they think that's procedurally required, but I think that would be a mistake. But I could see that happening, perhaps, for strategic reasons from the leadership. And there's also the point that articles of impeachment have in the past been reported out and brought to the House floor from out of committees other than the Judiciary Committee. That has happened. It's been a while, and it's relatively unusual, but so is impeachment. So I don't know that there's a great deal, there's not a lot to the set. The universe of impeachment, articles of impeachment that have actually been brought to the floor of the House, including judicial impeachments and other executive branch impeachments, is just not large, and it's been a while. And of late, they have been handled by the Judiciary Committee, and that may have something to do with the fact that most impeachments are judicial impeachments. But yes, traditionally, it's the Judiciary Committee in modern practice that has put the finishing touches, at least, on impeachment inquiries. But I have no doubt that if a future president were to be impeached over issues of corruption in the Housing and Urban Development Department. The initial investigation into that corruption would be handled by the Committee of Jurisdiction there, and maybe several committees with jurisdiction there. Government oversight could certainly be looking at it, and various. The Appropriations Committee responsible for HUD might also take a look at it. If it was in the EPA that the corruption was going on. Likewise, you might have an investigation in government oversight and an investigation in the Appropriations Subcommittee of Jurisdiction and in the Environment and Public Works Committee on the Senate side. But once they reached the conclusion that there was an impeachment in the offing, they might hand over either simply their work or their work plus a recommendation of articles of impeachment to the Judiciary Committee. But no one would say that they were unable to complete their work. That, I think, is an interpretation, if not an outright fabrication, that Pelosi and others are using to discourage people from supporting an immediate move to impeachment proceedings mode, whatever their reasoning may be for asking for such a thing. They are shamed into backing off by being accused of wanting to push Chairman Cummings off of his own work. And I don't know whether that's supposed to also have racial overtones or not, but it certainly could be interpreted that way. And I think it's unfair to do that. All right, moving on here. By the way, just one more note from John, who tells me, Cicilline might be their single representative in the House. Not that he was running to move up to Senate. But, hey, that could happen, too. Always weird when you get down to a single representative and there are two senators and one representative. Almost you wonder, what is it worth having to run statewide just like a senator, but only getting a 2-year term out of it? It happens in these small states. Anyway, back to the Pelosi-Nadler relationship here. We left off by saying the Judiciary Committee has been at the front lines, host of other committees sharing oversight responsibilities. If impeachment proceedings began, all those investigations, it says, would move under House Judiciary. Instead, half a dozen other chairs, all with healthy egos, are in on the action and see little incentive to fork over the spotlight to Nadler. People familiar with the Judiciary Committee's inner workings believe Pelosi is not keen on consolidating work under one chair. I don't think it's an accident that Pelosi has resisted centralizing all this under House Judiciary, said an aide to a Democrat on that committee. She's made her position clear, although she's never said it out loud, that impeachment would be a political loser for Democrats, and so she is very much in control of the caucus. Other Hill denizens view Nadler as frustrated, firmly under the thumb of Democratic leadership, and unable to advance an impeachment cause he instinctively supports. Staffers and members close to the committee have frustrations too. Some say Nadler has been captured by shiny objects, trying to do too much with too little. Others fear that the chair is overly concerned with the threat of a primary challenger back home, from a challenger who has targeted him on his handling of impeachment. I haven't read much about that, but there is a linked article on the subject, just for the sake of filling in the blanks here, from Politico. Alan Durkin writing, Nadler challenger targets him on impeachment. This from earlier this week. Lindsey Boylan, former New York State official who's giving the liberal stalwart, that'd be Nadler from Manhattan's West Side, one of his toughest primary fights in decades. And Boylan says the fact that he's at the helm of the committee and pushing forward is just not enough. I don't know whether that's going to work, but, we'll see. So just wanted to note for the record that, okay, that's who that is, in case we hear that name come up in the future. 3 staffers who spoke to the Daily Beast over the last month said several lawmakers have expressed privately that they feel the committee is moving too slowly and thus far failing to zero in on key priorities. Pardon the stumble there. Others point to episodes that, in retrospect, seem to be head-scratchers. At the top of the list is Nadler's abortive effort to make Attorney General Bill Barr answer questions from committee staff rather than members. Barr refused point blank, offering instead to come to a hearing before the full committee. Nadler refused, and the House moved forward to hold him in contempt. So in other words, I guess it was Nadler's idea that when Barr appeared, if Barr appeared, they would examine him in precisely the way that people suggested they ought to handle the Mueller investigation, with professional staff doing the questioning rather than members. Barr, when asked to appear that way, refused, and I guess it would be pretty likely that Mueller, who was also reluctant to appear, might likewise have balked at that. I don't know if he was asked about it, but he might likewise have balked at it. And because they treated him as less of a hostile, more of a friendly witness and less hostile than they would be regarding Barr if he were to appear, they may have made the concession. They may have made that concession to him. That format may have been adopted in order to keep Mueller happy and willing to testify without a fight. That's an interesting piece of background information for those of us trying to figure out why they approached the Mueller hearings from Wednesday in the way that they did. All right. In an interview, Cicilline, he's back in there, defended the decision, saying it was important to establish that the committee controlled the construct of the hearings and not the witnesses. But months after the fracas, Barr still hasn't spoken to the lower chamber, and some wonder what was gained. The whole thing about the staff interviewing Barr was stupid, said the senior aide. Was it really? Was that the hill to die on? A hill that no one understands. I'm not certain that that's entirely so. While Nadler navigates the tricky politics of impeachment and intramural Democratic fights, he remains a perennial thorn in Trump's side. On Wednesday night, several hours after Mueller finished testifying, Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, I can't believe that's still true, sent the Daily Beast a garbled, unsolicited text message, complete with emojis, reading, "This is like a grade B horror movie," emojis for movie camera and popcorn then appear, with Nadler and Schiff the stars. Remember, the hand keeps coming up, and you have to bat it down 4 or 5 times. Don't know what that means. Giuliani, who repped the president during the Mueller probe, would repeat this analogy of Nadler and impeachment as the zombie hand popping out from the dirt several times on Wednesday and Thursday, including in a Hannity segment that Trump would then tweet out. Stressing that Trump's legal team sees Nadler as a primary antagonist in this stage, Giuliani added, Nadler played according to script and was arguing with Pelosi for impeachment. That's the hand sticking out of the grave. He is dead set, pardon the pun, on making this hand analogy make some sense, and it's just not working. Stop trying to make the hand thing work. The president, for his part, doesn't expect the congressman to let up anytime soon either. In fact, he has nursed a personal grudge against Nadler for decades. During the 2016 campaign, there's a link there, we should look at that. During the 2016 campaign, Trump would bring up Nadler in conversations without any prompting just to trash him, per 2 people with knowledge of the internal discussions. In one instance, one of the sources recalled, the future president made a point of cruelly mocking Nadler's stomach reduction surgery. Okay, that sounds like par for the course for Trump. Let's see if there is, if we can fit in before we cut out for the break here. The personal grudge that he's had against Nadler for decades is a linked item. Can I open it up and see what it is? Yes, no? Is it going to let me do it here? All right, let's see. We've got to get ready to play our music. Let's see. The guy Trump called Fat Jerry is Chairman Nadler now. This is a piece from the Daily Beast from back in March. The congressman who stood his ground against the developer in New York is up against the president in Washington now. Long before there was Crooked Hillary and Lion Ted, there was Fat Jerry. It's a 1995 fight. We'll see if we can't fill you in on at least some of the scraps and details before moving on to other fun and entertaining subjects coming up right after this break. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We got our final segment here before departing for the weekend. We're going to have to pick up the pace here and see if we can hit a couple more stories before we exit for the weekend. But just by way of letting you know what the background is as between Jerry Nadler and Donald Trump, back in 1995, apparently they had a confrontation over Television City, a metropolis within a metropolis that Trump proposed on a 52-acre tract he acquired on the Upper West Side of Manhattan in the 1980s. Television City. It's a cute insight into Trump's persona there, right? If he's describing his nirvana here, it would be called Television City, and there'd be tellies everywhere, and you could just lie down on the couch and watch telly in your bathrobe, which you don't own, with anybody you wanted to. And I imagine that they were going to have, television networks were supposed to locate their headquarters and studios there, and that's why. But what could be better for the 1995 Donald Trump than developing someplace that had something to do with television? Okay, so that was the plan. And by the way, what a grandiose plan it was. Like most things, it starts out, Donald Trump, it's going to have 1 billion buildings. All of them are going to be 1 trillion stories high, the biggest buildings ever. Okay, what was up for this thing? The initial plan was for 8 towers and 5,700 apartments, as well as television and movie studios. Nadler met with Trump as the state assemblyman, who then represented the area. Trump excitedly told him that the centerpiece would be a 150-story building, the tallest in the world. The lower floors were to be NBC's new headquarters. That didn't work out. And Trump would, of course, occupy a palatial penthouse apartment at the very top. Above the clouds, he told Nadler. New Yorkers want the tallest building, Trump also said, and so do I. And apparently, Nadler was more of the opinion that New Yorkers wanted an affordable apartment. He opposed Trump's project, viewing it as a neighborhood destroyer, and probably was. Enough of the neighborhood agreed with him that he was elected to Congress after the incumbent, Representative Ted Weiss, died the day before the primary in 1992. How many people remember that? Mayor Ed Koch also had opposed the project and thought he had killed it when he used generous tax abatements such as Trump had wanted for Television City to convince NBC to remain at Rockefeller Center. Koch engaged in a bit of name-calling himself as he made clear his feelings regarding Trump. Piggy, 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 Koch said. Okay, very interesting background story. Just thought I'd throw that one out there. And I guess it does note in the story here, for those of you who I guess are only recently familiar with Jerry Nadler and maybe didn't get the Fat Jerry label, exactly why did he do that? Jerry Nadler used to be considerably heavier, and you probably figured that out from the mention of his stomach reduction surgery and I think he's 100+ pounds less than he used to be. He was a pretty big guy. I think they said topping out at about 328 pounds. Trump, of course, now, I guess, approaching that himself, and it looks particularly nervy for him to have done that. But in 1995, he wasn't quite as big as he is now. All right. So they've gone in opposite directions. Lots of other items stored in pockets, some of which are directly relevant to the subject we've been discussing, others extraneous. Let's see. Can we throw this one in here? And we'll try and make this one quick. This is a bit of a wow. We'll have to wait and see how it develops. But Larry Klayman, who is I guess generally described here as a conservative lawyer, he's the head of Judicial Watch, and they are, a gadfly conservative legal organization, constantly, they put forward their own stupid conspiracy theories, but they're constantly filing lawsuits in order to, in furtherance of their theories. And they sometimes actually strike gold with their lawsuits and make serious trouble. Anyway, the issue with Larry Klayman is he's in some trouble himself. This is from the Alabama papers, and it's on AL.com here. I guess one of Larry Klayman's latest roles is as Roy Moore's lawyers. So the headline here reads, Roy Moore lawyer accused of seeking romantic relationship from client. And I don't think that they mean Roy Moore here, but a different client. But that's an interesting read of the piece here. Paul Gaddis reporting for AL.com, a Washington lawyer representing Roy Moore in one of his post-Senate campaign lawsuits, has been charged by a legal ethics panel of seeking a sexual relationship with a client in 2010. The hearing committee on the Board of Professional Responsibility in the District of Columbia has recommended that Larry Klayman be suspended from practicing law in the district for 33 months. That would give us some respite, although I'm sure he'll have somebody else do his filings for him. Klayman is the attorney of record for Moore and his wife, Kayla, in their federal lawsuit against comedian Sacha Baron Cohen. I had no idea that they had that going on. Oh dear, I've got a text message here with a Google verification code, which I don't believe I've requested in any capacity. So I'll have to go figure out what that is in about half an hour from now. Klayman has denied the accusation. Washington Post reported Wednesday. It's just a recommendation by a hearing committee, Klayman told the Washington Post in a story posted on Wednesday. I missed that story. Klayman also criticized the review panel, telling the Post, it was a very politicized hearing committee, and I'm confident of success in the end. Klayman filed a lawsuit on the Moore's behalf last year against Cohen after Roy Moore appeared on the comedian's Showtime vehicle, Who is America? The Moores are asking for $95 million in damages. Sure, I'll take some of that. Why not? By the way, in the Showtime episode, Cohen posed as an Israeli anti-terrorism expert, Colonel Eran Morad, who was interviewing Moore when he mentioned a new piece of technology, a device that detects a hormone from pedophiles' sweat. You, Sacha Baron Cohen, you're just so crazy. Moore eventually walked off the set once he realized he had been tricked. Is there anything else that we really... The rest is about Moore, I guess, here. But an important development, because Larry Klayman is a big-time Republican conservative gadfly figure and screws a lot of things up for a lot of people fairly frequently. So if he were, in fact, banned from the practice of law, even for just a time, it would be of some interest. Okay. Other interesting stories that I thought I would share with you here. We discussed yesterday, and I'm sure you're aware of the story, that we discussed in the context of Donald Trump being wrong about his confrontation with the press, saying that when he was asked about the possibility of being charged after he leaves office, he said, no, that was retracted. There was a correction issued. There had, in fact, been a correction of sorts issued by Mueller with respect to his response to Ted Lieu's question about whether or not it was, in fact, the case that they would have recommended or would have directly indicted Trump for crimes if it weren't for the DOJ policy and OLC memo that claim that a sitting president can't be indicted, to which he had answered yes, but later qualified his answer. Ted Lieu apparently has some theories about why that happened. I've got a Talking Points memo piece and a CNN piece about that, and I don't know whether they are identical in their content or whether they overlap and offer two slightly different takes on things. Let's take a look. TPM goes with Lieu has a theory on why Mueller walked back. Oh, I got to get their pop-up out of the way. Walked back the indictment comments. And, well, here it is. Kate Riga reporting for TPM here. Ted Lieu said that former special counsel Robert Mueller walked back his comments about indicting the president because he didn't want to implicitly call Trump a felon, though that's what Lieu thinks Mueller actually believes. During the hearing on Wednesday, Lieu asked, "I'd like to ask you the reason again that you did not indict Donald Trump." I'd like to ask you the reason again. I guess he means if the reason is because Donald Trump is because of the OLC opinion stating that you cannot indict a sitting president. Mueller responded, that is correct. Mueller cleaned up his answer in his second hearing before the House Intel Committee, saying, I want to go back to one thing that was said this morning by Mr. Lieu, who said, and I quote, "You didn't charge the president because of the OLC opinion." And I don't know if that's really a quote or not, but okay. "That is not the correct way to say it," Mueller said. "As we say in the report, and as I said in the opening, we did not reach a determination as to whether the president committed a crime." Lieu isn't buying it. "I believe he fully understood my question," Lieu told CNN's Anderson Cooper Wednesday evening. "It was a logical extension of me getting him to establish the three elements of obstruction of justice were met. And I think it's what he actually believes. I think he may have walked it back because he understood that what that means is we got a felon in the White House, and that's what the hearing showed today, that Donald Trump committed multiple acts of obstruction of justice." Okay, so that's take number one. The CNN report here from Paul LeBlanc, let me see if it offers any other insight here. Ted Lieu says, Mueller walked back obstruction answer to avoid calling Trump a felon. Okay, so that's largely the same conclusion. I think, let's see, Mueller's initial response to Lieu, this story says, contradicted what Justice Department officials have said were the answers from the special counsel team during a March 5th meeting that included Mueller and his top lieutenants along with Attorney General William Barr, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, and other officials. Despite Mueller's testimony straying little from his written report, Lieu posited the televised hearings would move public sentiment against Trump and as a result help spawn an impeachment inquiry from Congress. All right. Well, that's a little bit of news, at least as far as the opinions of Ted Lieu there go. But okay, that I think together the two pieces offer a pretty good explanation as to why there was this backing off. I think we got Mueller's explanation of why he did it correct largely when we discussed it the other day. Lieu's theory is also pretty valid here. I think Mueller wants to avoid the impression that he's reaching these conclusions. Remember, he wanted to portray the thinking as the existence of the OLC memo prevented us, because it made it a moot issue, from ever considering the question of whether or not he would otherwise be charged with a crime, since it was a waste of time to do so, in their view. And that's a very different conclusion than, oh, hell yeah, I would absolutely charge him. But I mean, read together, the two things, and this is maybe why Donald Trump confused them so easily. Read together, even Mueller's version of the statement. Well, we didn't even consider whether or not we would charge him because there was the existence of this memo. Then read that side by side with Lieu's, I think, largely correct interpretation here, which is, all right, well, it's left unsaid because he doesn't want to go there, but it's pretty clear that the OLC memo is what colored his thinking. And they, given what they admit was established in the report, you know, it's a formulaic thing. It's math at this point. Here are the elements of obstruction of justice. Here is a demonstration that he meets all three of those elements. Here is the notice of the existence of the OLC memo. And here is the conclusion. We're not going to charge, you know, there won't be any charges filed, and we won't even consider whether or not they could be filed because OLC memo. So fine. Now, put that alongside the answer to whose questions were they that elicited this response. See if I can remember as we're running through it. But the question of, well, oh yes, right. It was actually the Republican who was asking this, although I assume it was prompted by questions earlier from a Democrat, because I don't know why a Republican would bring this up. But the question of, can the president be charged with obstruction of justice after he leaves office? And Mueller's answer was a flat yes, and there was no walking back from that and no correction or clarification issued on that. And there's no other conclusion you can reach. Well, why didn't you charge the president? Well, we didn't even consider whether we could because OLC memo. Well, then isn't it the case that the OLC memo was all that stood in between you and charging the president? I wouldn't say that, but only because I tried very hard not to say that. Well, given that you say that the president could be charged, or Donald Trump could be charged with obstruction of justice upon leaving office, and you're not a fortune teller, and you're not predicting that he's going to obstruct justice in some other fashion or in connection to some other case between now and his leaving office, although that would be an easy prediction to make, you're not making it, right? Right. So, if the president, once he's not president, could be charged with obstruction of justice, and your report lays out the elements of obstruction of justice and how he met them, but you're not charging him, isn't really the only conclusion that you can reach that you are not charging him because he's the sitting president and there's this OLC memo? And again, he would probably answer there, that is the conclusion that someone who was ignoring the existence of the OLC memo as a good excuse to not ask a moot question might say, but I didn't do that. Okay. I mean, there's really no other way to conclude it. So, all right. That's of some interest, I guess, going forward. You won't be able to convince anybody with that because it's too convoluted an argument, but it's true, and I'm sure you followed it. Let's see. Other issues of some interest here. Let's see. The various things we could touch on. Well, this one is more related to what we've been talking to. I saw an interesting tweet from Mark Warner the other day, and it's not often that I find them so interesting that I would retweet Mark Warner's tweets. Generally speaking, the tweets of most members of Congress pretty anodyne. But here's Mark Warner saying, tweeting out a clip of himself on CBS News, which brings with it the message, Mark Warner says Trump dismissing Russian threat because he is, quote, obsessed with his own well-being. What does that mean? Mark Warner actually cleared that up a little bit with this, his own tweet saying, seriously, his aides, Trump's aides, wouldn't let the Secretary of Homeland Security brief the president on election security because they were afraid it would bruise his ego. Apparently, that's the conclusion that Mark Warner reached here, that I guess the obsessed with his own well-being is, no, you can't tell me about election security because part of that briefing is going to be that we had problems with election security in 2016, and that by itself undermines the meaning of my electoral victory, my huge electoral college landslide, as he likes to tell people and show them the map. That somehow diminishes the political brilliance of my victory by telling me that there were breaches of election security. You follow, I think, but I thought that was an interesting way of putting it, and a sort of a new angle on it. That Senator Warner says, seriously, he won't even allow himself to be briefed by his own Secretary of Homeland Security for fear of damaging his own ego. That's, of course, enormously dangerous. Add that to the file of he misspells Al-Qaeda because he's never seen it in print because he doesn't read any of his national security briefings or anything else of interest for that matter. He won't let Homeland Security brief him on election security, not only because he hopes to benefit from the same election interference, but because it would make him sad. He would has a sad for that. And add to that even when he does get briefings on election interference, he's just as likely to pass that information on to the perpetrators of that election interference as he is to do something meaningful to stop it. In fact, he's probably more likely to do that than something meaningful to stop it. All right. Just thought I'd put that one on the record. A few other items of note. Here is a Jeffrey Epstein story, again from the indomitable Julie K. Brown, but this one accompanied by Nicholas Nehamas on this one. Lawmaker says she's been told to back off call for probe of Jeffrey Epstein's work release. How interesting is that? Let's find out what's going on here. Florida Senator Lauren Book has reached out to Capitol Police after receiving an anonymous warning connected to her demand for a state inquiry into Palm Beach Sheriff Rick Bradshaw's handling of accused sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein's lenient work release program. Whew, the Miami Herald has learned. Now, there was some more to it, and I don't know how long this story is, if we can get all the way through it. Did I also pocket the tweet that went with it? Because there were some inflammatory claims in that as well. No, I didn't. But let's see if we can get to them hopefully towards the top of the story. So Lauren Book, Florida senator, calling for an inquiry into his lenient work release program, which I think warrants investigation, but something happened. Book, a vocal advocate for child sexual assault survivors, said she also received more than a dozen calls from Bradshaw's political supporters, that's the Palm Beach sheriff, asking her to back off on her call for an investigation by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement into Bradshaw. Let's see. The article continues on Monday. Book, a Democrat, wrote a letter to Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, so that probably won't work, asking him to authorize a probe into how Epstein, accused of molesting dozens of underage girls and a registered sex offender, was permitted to leave the Palm Beach County Jail and spend much of his 2008-2009 incarceration in an office in West Palm Beach. DeSantis said Thursday after a cabinet meeting that he would certainly consider an investigation, but that he has yet to decide how the state should respond. I saw someone send me a letter. I looked at it. He said, I've got to figure out what the proper role of FDLE is. I know they're investigating it down in Palm Beach. Clearly, when you look at how that happened, even if like 10% of the things about him are true, then that whole agreement was obviously suspect and willfully below what he should have faced. We'll see whether he follows through on that. While the governor was still weighing the merits of the senator's request, the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office issued a new statement that its previously announced internal affairs investigation of the deputies who guarded and supervised Epstein during his work release had become a criminal investigation as well. No further elaboration was provided. I wonder if they're going to be able to contain this thing. Maybe not. Meanwhile, Book, in an interview with the Herald, said she had asked the Capitol Police, who handle security for state lawmakers, to look into claims made on a Russian website alleging that Sheriff Bradshaw, was behind an effort to access her phone and emails by using the pretext of imminent danger to obtain her personal information. I've received countless phone calls saying, "Little girl, you don't know what you're getting into," and telling me that I should just stop, said Book, a child sexual abuse survivor herself who's worked to pass strict sex offender laws in Florida. In a statement, the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office said it had no knowledge of anyone trying to threaten or pressure Book, nor has PBSO made any efforts to access her phone or emails as alleged on a salacious website run by a disgruntled former employee, the statement said. Now, it could certainly be disinformation, and you must keep that in mind. But what are we talking about here? They just said that it was a Russian website, right, that was putting this out. And then the sheriff's office says, well, it's a salacious website. run by a disgruntled former employee. How would that be? Well, pbsotalk.org, the website in question, is a blog tied to a former Palm Beach sheriff's deputy who moved to Russia after starting the site, interestingly enough, which claims it is dedicated to exposing corruption in the Palm Beach sheriff's office. Moved to Russia. The former deputy, John Dugan, fled to Moscow in 2016 following an FBI raid on his Palm Beach home that he claims was politically motivated. Wow, that is pretty strange. Usually, a Palm Beach County sheriff's deputy fleeing to Russia, I mean, who do you think you are? But, what if he was targeted by the FBI for political reasons? How crazy is this guy? I have no idea. The pressure against Book came on the same day that Epstein, 66, was found injured in his cell at the Metropolitan Correction Center in New York, where he's awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges brought earlier this month by the U.S. Attorney for the SDNY. His arrest stemmed from alleged behavior with underage girls dating back more than a decade in New York and Florida. You know all about that, where he was arrested, etc., etc. You know that he was found, by some reports, unconscious, and by other reports, crying. And I guess you could be crying in an unconscious state. I don't know. In his cell Wednesday evening amid speculation that he may have tried to commit suicide or been attacked by another inmate. Last Friday, Bradshaw announced the internal affairs investigation after reports emerged that Epstein, while on work release in Palm Beach, was allowed female visitors to his office, including at least one visit that led to a sexual encounter. That should be against the rules, don't you think? The terms of Epstein's incarceration were detailed by the Herald as part of the series about Epstein's case, Perversion of Justice. We all know about that series and how brilliant it's been. And let's see. Where do we continue here? Jack Scarola, who represents several of Epstein's victims, said it's ludicrous to think that Bradshaw is able to investigate his own department. The allegations are against the sheriff, and there's no way a credible investigation can be conducted by the sheriff's office when the allegations extend to the very top of the organization. I'd say he has a point there. Lauren Book, whose father, Ron Book, is perhaps the most powerful lobbyist in Florida. Did you know that? I don't know who he lobbies for, but said she intends to pressure the governor for full and thorough investigation. The privileges that Epstein received in Palm Beach County were outside the scope of what anyone else would receive, and we need an independent body to look into this. I don't think it's necessarily worth running through all of this, but I think we would all say we agree with that. Any more information that needs to be added to this? I don't think so. Most of the rest is background on Epstein. But I guess the most serious thing I wanted to bring to your attention is, one, that there is an investigation underway. Two, that there ought to be more investigations underway. And three, that one of the sheriff's deputies in 2016 had his home raided by the FBI, fled to Russia, and is now running a Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office expose website from out of Russia. And I don't know what the hell that's supposed to mean, but what an interesting development. I guess one more story we'll at least mention and put on the record here. I'm not sure where this one goes, and we won't have time to read through it, but Elliot Broidy is back in the news. This guy can't stay out of the news. Lachlan Markay for the Daily Beast has the latest on him. GOP moneyman Elliot Broidy enlisted veteran diplomat amid influence campaign. Ambassador Dennis Ross said he did not know at the time that the GOP moneyman was running a campaign designed to steer U.S. policy in the Middle East. Of course, now we know that he's all about trying to make money off of, well, everything, but in particular, the Middle East. What this story is all about is anyone's guess, but of course you can check your guess by reading Lachlan Markay's piece about it. I will include it in the roundup and encourage you to read it over the weekend. Let's see if there's any inkling here up at the top. Let's see. Elliot Broidy, blah, blah, blah. Deep connections with Washington's foreign policy intelligentsia, and a fundraiser for the Republican National Committee, of course, and a national finance co-chair, right? Used his Trump administration connections to advance interests aligned with Gulf monarchies. We know all about, of course, their plans to sell nuclear technology across the Gulf. By the way, one thing I didn't bring up was something I saw tweeted around earlier today. Apparently, Mohammed bin Salman has got some plans for the new Middle East, the new Saudi Arabia, as he sees it, and it's very difficult to distinguish those plans, as Mike Bird, who tweeted this list around, was a reporter for the commentator for the Wall Street Journal, said Mohammed bin Salman's plan for Saudi Arabia's $500 billion city of the future sound like the ramblings of an 8-year-old who's just been to Epcot for the first time. And I mean, he's really serious about that. The plans apparently including robot martial arts fighting venues, along with an artificial moon to illuminate the sky, plus flying taxis as well. All the fun stuff you might expect in the city of the future.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, well, at any rate, we've got plenty coming up pretty soon. Oh, look, we're going to have a technical glitch that's going to get in the way of a live show for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam, but a podcast is coming. So for those of you who are loyal listeners, do stay tuned, keep an eye out for it. It'll be there before the weekend comes. See you next week.